All right, it is 11 a.m. sharp here on the West Coast. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today for our webinar with Hobo Data Loggers. Today's webinar is a thought leader webinar. That means it's going to be brought to us by somebody other than some employees that work at Hobo Data Loggers. And today we have the honor of having Cassie Chahan and Chris Lundeen with Fresno Irrigation District in North Kings GSA with us. And they are going to dive into some insight that they are gathering through the data with groundwater management and sustainability. So I'll let them introduce themselves, but just a little bit of housekeeping. They are going to speak, and then afterwards at the end, we will have some time for question and answers. So at the end, we'd like to bring up those questions. If you have a question that you would like to bring up to our speakers, please go ahead and put those into the questions drop down, and then we'll be able to kind of have those, and I'll be able to queue those up for Cassie and Chris at the end. So thank you so much, Cassie and Chris, for being with us today. And now is your time.
All right, thank you. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Brett and Connor, for having us today. We're excited to be here. I'm Cassie Chahan, and as Brett mentioned, I'm a special project manager for Fresno Irrigation District and also the executive officer of the North Kings Groundwater Sustainability Agency. So we're going to tag team on this effort. I'm joined by my colleague, Chris Lundeen. I'll give him a second to introduce himself, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Hello, Chris Lundeen, Engineering Tech 3 with FID. And I assist with and/or manage the remote monitoring duties for the Fresno Irrigation District in the North Kings.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about our experience, and in order to be able to have the conversation be as meaningful as possible, felt like it was very important to give you a little bit of background, recognizing that we have a diverse audience joining us. But really, at the end of the day, we're going to talk about how data is helping with good groundwater management, and ultimately with the region being, yes.
Can I jump in real quick? I think you're in presenter mode, so I see your both slides here.
Uh-oh, I changed that earlier when I was hanging out with Connor, so let me know if that's better.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry for the introduction.
Yeah, no, thank you. Ultimately, how data is going to help this region reach sustainability, but to be able to get to that conclusion and share our insights on that, felt like it was necessary for you to have some background information on not only the Fresno Irrigation District, but also the North Kings Groundwater Sustainability Agency, because I recognize we have a diverse audience that's joining us today. So we'll go ahead and dive right in. As Brett mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to jot them into the chat, and we will have plenty of time for questions and answers and discussion at the end of the presentation. So just briefly, Fresno Irrigation District is over 100 years old. It's an irrigation district that was founded in 1920 and established in 1920. So since that time, we've grown and changed significantly. We have a staff of about 88 people and cover about 250,000 acres within the district boundary. We also have a lot of infrastructure. Some of it is more than 150 years old, but we have about 680 miles of canals and pipelines that helps with conveyance of the surface water during our irrigation deliveries, as well as stormwater routing during the flood irrigation season. We also have a lot of groundwater recharge basins, and I'll spend a fair amount of time talking about groundwater recharge and how that is really becoming a primary management tool for getting a lot of water back into the underground to offset the pumping that's occurring in the area. We have 980 acres dedicated for groundwater recharge within the FID footprint. And then we have another 380 acres that are planned. We also have about 8,000 customers. We have a lot of very small farms, 20 to 40 acres, and then we have some very large farms. About 2,800 of those 8,000 customers take surface water. So we have some folks that only use groundwater to irrigate their crops, and then others who use a combination of surface water and groundwater. We also have the cities of Fresno and Clovis within the Fresno Irrigation District footprint, and they are essentially one of FID's largest customers. They use about 30% of the water in the area to meet their demands. So as I mentioned, we cover about 250,000 acres, and this is really just for reference. Fresno, for those who may be joining from somewhere other than the Central Valley, we are located pretty much right smack dab in the middle of the state of California, both east and west and north and south, and we are favorably positioned between two major watersheds, the San Joaquin River watershed and the Kings River watershed. We have Millerton Lake on the San Joaquin system that has storage capacity of about 520,000 acre feet. And then about twice that size, we have the Pine Flat Reservoir that stores water off the Kings River watershed. And then we are able to pull that water into the region for agricultural and municipal demands. Of the 250,000 acres, we have about 150,000 of those acres that are prime farmland. And Fresno County is #1 or sometimes #2 in terms of ag producing counties in the nation. So we have lots of the food and fiber and all crops that are grown here in the Fresno Irrigation District area, as well as some of the largest municipalities in the state of California. We have to figure out a way to balance those demands so that we can reach sustainability, and that's one of our challenges before us. The other thing that it's worth mentioning is we are situated on soils that are very favorable for groundwater recharge in the bulk of our area. And so we are relying significantly on groundwater recharge as a means of reaching sustainability. In order to be able to maximize those efforts and make sure that we're getting the most out of those efforts, we rely on data, and that's really what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. So before that, though, let's talk about Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. As for those of you, again, that maybe are not from the Central Valley or California, that is a law that was passed in 2014, and it was passed as we were in the middle of one of the worst droughts in California history. And so the governor at the time, Governor Brown, recognized that we needed to do something long-term from a state level to address the chronic overdraft that occurs, especially during these periods where we have prolonged droughts. And so SGMA was passed. It was developed essentially to eliminate overdraft conditions and address some of the adverse impacts that come along with those extended dry periods and overdraft conditions. It requires groundwater sustainability by 2040, which sounds like a really, really long time, especially being that it was passed in 2014. The first plans were submitted in 2020. It was about a 20-year timeline to be able to reach sustainability. But from a groundwater manager perspective, I can tell you that the time is flying by, and 2040 will be here before we know it. So it's in the grand scheme of creating the amount of change that's going to be needed to reach sustainability, it is really a very short timeline. So we are all working expeditiously to try to meet those goals. One of the fundamental elements of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is that it was founded on local control. So the legislation allows for locals like Fresno Irrigation District, like the North Kings Groundwater Sustainability Agency, to figure out a path to sustainability and start implementing the projects and management actions that are going to be necessary to reach sustainability, and be able to demonstrate through progress reports that are submitted to the Department of Water Resources that we're taking those incremental steps and on a path to reach sustainability by 2040. Of course, if those local controls aren't proving to be successful, or we're getting behind and we're not making significant progress, there is a state intervention backdrop, which essentially is when the Department of Water Resources will refer the basin and the Groundwater Sustainability Agency over to the State Water Board, State Water Resources Control Board, for some assistance with development of an alternate plan and implementing the required actions to get back on track to reach sustainability. So from our perspective, the local approach is by far the better approach. And so we have been successful here in our GSA with having an approved plan and retaining that local control and reporting just through the Department of Water Resources. So when the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was passed, there was the formation of several basins as well as many groundwater sustainability agencies. So for the local area, including the North Kings GSA, we are in the Kings Subbasin. It covers almost 1 million acres. And there are 7 groundwater sustainability agencies, and there are 7 groundwater sustainability plans. Now, in a perfect world, you would think that 1 GSA and 1 plan would be sufficient, but that is not the way the entities within the King Subbasin moved forward, which the law did allow for multiple GSAs and multiple groundwater sustainability plans. And just as long as they stayed coordinated through what they call a coordination agreement. So we have 7 GSAs, 7 plans. All of the plans were developed with similar methodology and data sets, and so they're coordinated through what we call, again, that coordination agreement. So just a little bit more specifically about the North Kings GSA, we of the 1 million acres that are part of the King Subbasin, we cover about 310,000 acres, slightly more than that. It was formed in December of 2016 through a joint powers agreement. It's governed by a board that represents the 7 member agencies within the GSA boundary, and as I already mentioned, it includes the city of Fresno and Clovis, as well as city of Kerman and several small entities. A significant portion of the North Kings GSA is the Fresno Irrigation District, and so there is a lot of interaction that happens, which is why I'm sitting at the table with Chris Lundeen with Fresno Irrigation District, and I'm a shared employee of the district. There's a lot of interaction that happens between the GSA and the North Kings GSA. And despite all of the surface water that we have in the area and all of the groundwater recharge efforts that have been going on long before recharge was popular and recharge was really the thing to do in the Central Valley, we have continued to see groundwater levels decline at the rate of about 1 foot per year over the last 100 or so years. And so despite all of those efforts, despite the amount of irrigable acres we have and the flood irrigation that was happening, the reduction in the amount of surface water that we have, the increase in the number of crops, has continued to show that the groundwater levels are declining even in an area like ours. So SGMA says we have to avoid what we refer to as the 6 deadly sins of SGMA. There are some that we don't have a big issue with here in the North Kings GSA, including land subsidence and or seawater intrusion, but all of the others that are listed on the screen, lowering of groundwater levels, reduction of groundwater storage, degraded water quality, and surface water depletion, we have significant concerns about here in the North Kings GSA. So our groundwater sustainability plan essentially outlines how we're going to address and avoid what's known as undesirable results in each of those categories that we're faced with. Some areas in the San Joaquin Valley have significant issues with land subsidence, essentially the sinking of the land because the layers are collapsing. And once that condition exists, it's irreparable. You have to essentially address the infrastructure damages that are caused, and you can't regain that section of the aquifer once it is subsided. So that is significant in parts of the San Joaquin Valley, but not something that we have a significant issue with here in the North Kings GSA. So how are we going to do this? I mean, there's obviously, I mentioned that we have the some of the most prime agricultural land in the valley. We have a lot of municipal users, and it's not as simple as just turning off the pumps. And there's a lot of folks out there who think the solution is just get rid of the demand, and that would essentially be devastating, not only from an economical perspective in a valley that is hugely supported by agriculture, but also from a food supply perspective, right? Like, it's not a one size solution fits all, and it's not entirely about demand reduction. So when we're thinking about what are the management actions that we can take to reach sustainability over this 20-year period, we have put a lot of emphasis in the North Kings GSA and FID specifically on expanding our groundwater recharge program. How can we put more and more water into the underground, recognizing that we will have dry periods in the future? Those dry periods will come, and we're going to have to use the groundwater supply to meet crop demands. But we also know that there's going to be really wet periods, and how can we utilize the surface water available that is available during those really wet periods to maximize storage in the local area and expand our recharge efforts. So, like I said, we have been doing groundwater recharge for a very long time, and we have some great partnerships. We have this collaborative program between Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District and the cities of Fresno and Clovis, where not only do we have those 980 acres of dedicated FID basins, but we also have basins that the cities have, which total of another 360 plus acres. We also have about 1,400 acres that are Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control basins. So we have tried to maximize potential at each of those facilities to get the maximum amount of water into the underground, like I mentioned. Huge amount of effort in this first, I would say, 5 to 10 years of the groundwater sustainability plan in expanding those programs, because it will significantly help with increasing the amount that we can store in the underground. In a state that is challenged to do any type of new above ground reservoir project, this is really what we've resorted to, making sure that we are taking advantage of the prime soil conditions and storing the water in the underground. So these are just some pictures of our latest recharge basins. A lot of these have been developed since SGMA was passed and our groundwater sustainability plan was submitted in 2020. And this is just a small sampling of them, some of them completed as early as last year. And we have more in progress. The Carter Bybee Basin is under construction. We're finishing up earthwork there. Again, just huge parcels of land. Generally, we aim to have at least 40 acres of land available, and we build up some berms. We use do excavation, and we use the soil conditions that are present to filter the water into the underground and make sure that it's there for available usage in future years. And then more to come, right? So I mentioned we're trying to really maximize potential here. So FID has about 380 additional acres that are planned and in some phase of either environmental review, design, or about ready for future construction. And so that will expand the current efforts from 980 to just over 1,200 acres of dedicated recharge, in addition to all of those other acres that we have through the collaborative program that we run with the cities and Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District. And I think just to segue into how is data helping us portion of the presentation, it really is important to emphasize that literally every drop counts, and we do not have a means of monitoring how successful our recharge efforts are without good data to support that. And so I'm going to have Chris talk to you about some of the challenges we were having with our existing system prior to converting over to HOBO and the onset units. And then also, kind of where we're at today and how much better we're able to monitor our recharge efforts, and how the groundwater conditions maybe are changing. And that is something that we do on a routine basis. There are what we call regulatory readings that are required twice per year as part of our groundwater sustainability plan. And the map that you're hopefully seeing on your screen now is a map of the monitoring locations that are within the North Kings GSA boundary. So each of those squares on the map represents a location where we take a groundwater measurement twice per year. We do that once in the spring and once in the fall, which Chris just sent us the fall readings. And it's essentially intended to be before pumping occurs in the spring, after any benefits of a wet winter, hopefully a wet winter, have established. And so we take those readings in the spring, and then we take the readings in the fall, which are representative kind of worst case conditions after the pumping that has occurred throughout the irrigation season and the harvest season. And I'll just point out, we have these wells, representative monitoring wells, that are located throughout the GSA boundary. We have about 32 of them located throughout the boundary. We have some that are proposed. We're doing some replacement wells, some that are going to be right along the San Joaquin River, because as was mentioned as one of the seven or six deadly sins of SGMA, we have to monitor interactions between the surface water in the rivers and the pumping that's occurring in and around the rivers. And so these monitoring wells and having good data on the actual levels is going to be helpful as we continue the investigations on interconnected surface waters. And then in addition to that, we have several that are just placed throughout the GSA boundary to monitor groundwater levels for that section of the GSA. I will mention just briefly that the monitoring wells that we currently have in place are existing agricultural wells, and that's problematic, as Chris will tell you. I'm getting a note about my control panel here, blocking the view. Thank you for that. As Chris will tell you, using existing agricultural wells is problematic, because you go to take a reading and they're pumping and you're trying to get a static water level. And so we recognized a couple of years ago that we need to have a dedicated monitoring network. So we are transitioning over to having dedicated monitoring wells, which will be a huge improvement, as well as having each of those dedicated monitoring wells equipped with a hobo unit, so that we have not only those twice per year measurements, but we have continuous measurements, which will help in investigations. And I'll come back with more on that towards the end of the presentation. But for now, I'm gonna turn it over to Chris, and he'll just talk you through some of the challenges that we were facing and what the ultimate solution was for the North Kings GSA and FID. So take it away, Chris.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So this is going to go back to probably a year or more ago, when this whole groundwater monitoring was being looked at. So we had issues out at our basin sites. We have 4 basins. Each of them have dedicated monitoring wells that were installed as part of their grant funding. In these wells, we had loggers hanging in there, and basically we had to go out every month and either take the laptop out there with some type of connection cable and get a measurement, and that worked for a while. And then we started having some connection issues. With those old loggers, when you had connection issues, you either had to find another way to get the data or pull the entire logger out of the hole. Some of these wells that we have out of our sites, each of the basins has at least one deep well that may be 250 feet or 400 feet, in which case we would hang the logger at like 250. So that could be quite annoying after a while if you keep having interruptions when you're trying to collect this data. So I set off to find another solution. the other problem we had is the supplier that we were working with at the time was in Canada. So getting any type of equipment fixed or repaired or getting data took at least 2 weeks, a week to get there, and another week to diagnose, and a week to get back. So when you're down 3 weeks and you're not getting data in a hole unless you have extra loggers on hand, it becomes a big problem to deal with year after year. So we set off to look for another solution. And I'm a big proponent of technology, and so I was pushing for a remote option. And we ended up setting on onset. So, yeah, so when we were researching, onset, there's a few things that caught our mind. So the years that onset has been in this business, and they also, offering both remote and field monitoring solutions. So that was two things to look at. And we had a nice post or saying from the USGS about their cellular data for their remote groundwater solutions. And another big thing was the loggers includes the barometer. You don't have to hang a separate barometer in the hole. It's just one logger, you're good to go, and it compensates the data for you. Where before we were having to do our barometric compensation outside in Excel. And of course, the platform for real-time monitoring. So some of these have changed, right? At the time, we didn't have any local support for Hobo. Now we have Brett, and he has been great. Mm-hmm. And at the time, we thought that the solar would be a con for the power. It is not. It is great. And we have seen a very small, if any, battery decline in any of our currently, I think it's 15 now, remote systems out in our basins. Yeah, again, the competition did not have a logger that had barometric compensation in it. You would have to hang a separate barrel logger, download 2 different sets of data, and we weren't going to do that anymore. That's what we've been doing. It also, for a field option required additional equipment. I think most do, but we wanted to get away from having additional equipment to maintain. So that was another big thing to push us to the remote option. And again, the cost was a big pro with Hobo, very reasonable compared to the competition. So we'll move on to kind of where this is one of our basin sites. This is Lambrick. You can kind of see how we have the home station down at the bottom near monitoring well 302. And the other 3 monitoring wells kind of report back to that station. And we can also get a quick view of the current water level in that well. So we have 5 basins currently that are set up in this fashion. We have Lambrick, we have Waldron, we have Boswell, and we have James Irwin Basin that we just got set up. And the next basins to be set up will be Savory Pond and Kennison Sanchez. They'll be set up with the same kind of system that we have here. And again, this is the LICOR dashboard. So if you were to get the remote monitoring set up and go to your devices, up in the top right, there's a little globe that will show you the map of where all of your basins are, or where are your remote monitoring equipment's out in the field. So very easy to use and navigate. And then we will go to, we had to do a little bit of, as you can see, the 2 pictures on the right are what would be installed at Lambrick. So these wells have an external casing. So we had to find a way to mount these remote units, and they kind of have like a 5-6 foot tail on them. And so we have this external mount that goes onto our external casing of our well, and that kind of helps us mount the equipment in there. And then the picture in the middle is the home station that all the moats report to, and it's all solar up high. I have had no issues with these or anything like that. And then the one on the left, that's at James Irwin Basin, and we had a well driller come in and put a cap on it with a 2-inch pipe so that we could fit the little well cap on there, the little yellow well cap that helps hold the cable in place, because you don't want to suspend these tails and the connection point near the door handle freely. So that cap kind of helps hold that in place. But those are the two options that we have right now. And the North Kings is going to have a similar design. I don't have a picture here with us, but we can share that with anybody that's interested in seeing that, as well as any of these other designs for an external well mount.
I think one of the things that is worth mentioning is we were very concerned about vandalism. Very concerned, because these sites are located out in remote areas. A lot of them maybe have a fence, but not something that's going to keep someone out if they really wanted to get in. And so we were very concerned about putting this equipment in and then having it removed, which we do have a big issue with in general with ag equipment. And so Chris was really good about coming up with the design that would help minimize the temptation for a theft, right? So we don't have anything that's shiny on these. We try to, not make it look like copper or aluminum, which are very problematic in this area. And then we also try to put it up in the air so that, they would have to really try hard if they were going to try to steal something. So just if anyone listening has similar concerns about installing these units at remote locations, we were able to come up with a way to deter vandalism. And so far it's been successful. I should probably knock on wood, but we have not had any issues with vandalism so far with the units that have been installed.
Yeah, no issues. The part of the external mount that goes on there with the tubing was to keep the tail of the moat inside. Less things for people to look at. All they see is this piece of equipment tied to the top of the pole. It's not very interesting. It gets dirty over time. The birds love it. It's not something that's really attracting attention. And then same with the picture that's on the left. To get that up high, I think, Hobo likes these units at least 6 foot above grade, to help them communicate with each other. And so in this instance, just trying to keep the cabling tight. It's still over in an old looking well, and eventually this is gonna collect dust and get dirty and stuff like that, and hopefully not attract too much attention as well. But yeah, so far so good. No issues with vandalism. So we'll move on to the dashboard for the recently installed James P. Irwin Basin remote monitoring. So you can set these up in a few different ways. We keep it simple for the data that really pertains to what we want to look at, obviously. So we have the latest reading, and then it gives you the time. And we also like to see the trend line and the depth of water. So here you can see over this week, you can set a date range. Over the last week, we've seen a small rise in both the wells out of the site, so that's encouraging. And then moving further, diving into it a little bit, here is, I believe this is a well out at Lambrick. Yep, Lambrick Baking Facility. So what I want to point out is the red circle is, this is like the beginning or a snapshot of what our 2025 irrigation season looks like from left to right. So we began April 1st. And right around the end of the first week, probably around April 9th, we fired up the recovery wells. So we do that so that we can try and extend our irrigation. We can bring a little less water in, and we can pump a little bit more water to kind of extend the season. And the way we offset that is shortly after we start recharging water into these basins. And even though these pumps have kicked on, I think at Lambert there's 3 recovery wells. As you can see, as our irrigation season moved on, April, May, into June, we have a steady rise of the groundwater despite our recovery well pumping to help extend our irrigation season, ultimately ending with a net positive groundwater replenishment, which is part of our groundwater management plan for these basins anyways. So we always try and leave 10% for recharge. And then, yeah, upcoming for 2026, we'll be adding recovery well discharge flow remote monitoring with Hobo. So we're working on that currently. And hopefully that'll help us get a better look as well at our water operations out there at our banking sites.
So I think that's a really interesting point too, Chris. It's like once you have the technology and you really start to buy into the benefits of having this at your fingertips, not having to go. Sometimes some of the sites we have, Chris has to travel 30, 45 minutes just to get to, and then spend time there, you know, extracting the data, downloading the data, then coming back to the office. Literally these tools, the investment into the Hobo units and this LICOR dashboard have enabled this type of a snapshot you know, on a moment's notice, just about as fast as he can log into the dashboard, he can see what's going on. So it's hugely beneficial. And we're already, even though we, you know, we have 15 sites set up, we're continuing to expand. We've really seen the benefit of having this data at our fingertips to be able to make decisions. And the incorporation of this flow remote monitoring is also going to be very helpful, because right now we really have no way of knowing whether or not the well is actually on. So this will allow us to save a trip, save time, save money, and be able to see that as well right from our dashboard in the computer. So just want to emphasize and give Chris a lot of credit for exploring this and really implementation here at FID in the North Kings GSA. You want to expand on that, Chris? Yeah, go ahead.
That's a good point that Cassie brings up. We don't really have a way. You know, we have a SCADA room, right? But that's more for operations, you know, and stuff like that, maintaining flow in our systems and stuff like that. But when it comes to if our water master wanted to go and see if our recovery wells are pumping, he'd have to either A, call one of the guys in the field, or B, go into the SCADA room, whereas with this LICOR cloud, he can go in there, have the ability to go in there and say, oh, cool, we're doing, you know, 3 CFS out of this recovery well, cool. And it just doesn't go to our water master too. That's what's cool about this. So literally our general manager, either of the AGMs, Cassie herself, our chief engineer, can have, you know, read access to this information and get it without even having to come and ask me, or coming to ask me, and then I'll be like, well, I don't have that. I plan on going out Friday. I'll let you know. Okay. This is like
real time.
Real time. And when customers call, that's the big thing, right? When you're using public funds, you got to make it's got to make it seem like it's worth something, you know, to the customer. So I literally had a farmer call the other day asking what the water level was like in his general area. And I was able to give him, hey, check this out. This is what the wells are doing in your area, or just to the north of you, or just to the south of you. Mm-hmm. And being able to provide that information when somebody calls is it's pivotal, because how many times do you call somebody and they don't have the information, or they'll say, "Oh, I'll have to call you back in a week," or so
Yeah, having it at your fingertips is definitely advantageous and instills confidence with your stakeholders and your customers that versus I'll get back to you, or I'll get you some additional information. Let me check that out. So from a groundwater management perspective, we all know data is our friend, and having better data leads to better management. And as it relates specifically and kind of piggybacking off of what Chris was just talking about, that twice per year measurements are great, and we'll continue to do those because we're required to by the SGMA legislation and what we've stipulated to in our groundwater sustainability plan. But what happens in between those two data points is equally important. And so we are going to continue to invest in HOBO units and build out our system. As I mentioned, we're moving to dedicated monitoring wells, and every single one of those will be equipped with a HOBO unit, an onset unit, so that we can tie it into the dashboard. And from our perspective at the North Kings GSA, it's going to help with dry well investigations. We're going to have a registry of all the wells in our GSA, and then we'll have our dedicated monitoring wells that have continuous monitoring. So if there's if there's a claim that my well went dry because there's too much pumping in this area, we'll be able to identify that location, identify the closest monitoring well, and what's been happening over the course of whether it's a month, a year, etc. We'll be able to pull that data, as Chris was showing, on the dashboard. It also, we see a benefit for investigating degraded water quality claims. There's a lot of folks, and there is evidence that shows if you're pulling from a deeper aquifer, it can change the water quality. And so knowing those groundwater levels, again, will help us to identify whether or not the change in water quality at a particular location could have been tied to a decline in groundwater levels, because we'll have those groundwater levels at our fingertip, not just these 6 months apart readings. Equally important will be the investigations as it relates to interconnected surface water. We are early on in our investigation of determining what those sustainable management criteria will be for interconnected surface waters. But again, what is that interaction between the rivers that run through on the boundaries of our system and the groundwater pumping in that local area? And have there been changes in water levels that could indicate that more water is being pulled out of the river or not? So that's going to be very important. And then equally important is the groundwater dependent ecosystems that are located in and around the river system. So we just see more and more need for better data, and this solution has proven very beneficial to the North Kings GSA as well as Fresno Irrigation District. And the customer service perspective that Chris talked about is important, and we will continue to expand that out as we move forward. So we really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. We're going to open it up to a few questions if there are any, and I apologize for the disruption kind of in the middle with the PowerPoint, but hopefully you caught the slides and you caught the discussion. If there's at any point anything that comes to mind that you would like to reach out to either Chris or I, feel free. I've listed our contact information there, and also can provide the slides to Connor to provide if anyone is interested as well. So Brett, I don't know if we have any questions, but I will turn it back over to you if there are any.
Okay, perfect. Cassie, can you hear me? That's what I was afraid of.
Brett is muted, but since I know you all can hear us, we can see the map. Can you please? Okay, so that was that. For remote monitoring, how is the data being read? Are they reading flow meters? If so, how can we verify accuracy? So maybe talk about what we're monitoring, like in terms of the groundwater levels.
In terms of the groundwater levels?
Yeah, we're not measuring flow right now. I think there was a a plan to have flow sensors moving
Yeah,
forward, but right now we're
yeah.
just doing
So,
groundwater levels.
Yeah, in the future, yeah, right now we're just monitoring groundwater levels annually, monthly even. But yeah, in the future, what we're trying to set up on our recovery wells is a moat that's tied to our micrometers, and so we're trying to get that pulse output to work. So right now, our guys have to go out and physically read the micrometers. It just as if I was having to go out personally and measure the groundwater before, or go get data from these wells before we had this LICOR. So not only is it going to help engineering, it could help our field staff as well, where he could look in there and be like, okay, I've pumped this many acre feet today, or this many CFS today. And then, he could just go out to the meter and check that data to make sure that we're getting an accurate reading off of the meter and the LICOR note that's collecting that pulse signal. So that's for the future. It'll help our water master, as well as the recharge and recovery ops are something that we report per our monitoring plan for those basins. So hopefully, this is helping more of the engineering side, North King side, whereas the flow would help the water and operations side of our district.
Yeah, thank you. We do have another question about a model and whether or not we have a model. And we have a hydrological conceptual model for the GSA. We do not have a full groundwater model, where we have some modeling work that has been done, particularly on the boundaries of our system, because there is a fair amount of boundary flow that is occurring, and so we're trying to monitor that boundary flow and interactions between on both sides of the boundary, and how that may or may not be impacting groundwater levels in our area. But I agree, I mean, I think you make a valid point. The person that typed the question in related to this type of data being very helpful to collaborate the model, and that would be part of a future effort, if and when we develop a full district-wide or basin-wide model for reaching sustainability. So we will, I'll keep you posted on that, but certainly the data would feed very nicely into that. And let's see. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're working on is just, we, as I mentioned, the North Kings GSA has a well registration program going on right now, and it's hard to believe as a groundwater manager, I can't tell you exactly how many wells we have in our GSA, but I soon will be able to. And then from there, we will be doing some work to identify the amount of pumping that is occurring, who's getting surface water, and where we have recharge basins located, essentially establishing like a zone of benefit, if you will, for those basins. And then we'll be able to track the molecules that way. And these groundwater level maps and readings, continuous readings, will help with that effort as well. So it's a lot that is in progress, and we just continue to make those investments because it's going to be our best defense here, moving forward as we continue to try to reach sustainability and make good groundwater management decisions in the area. Thank you for your question. And we have a few more minutes, so feel free to type in your question if you think of it. We do have another one. Do you correct the logger measurement for sensor drift by comparing them with manual measurements? What is the process like?
We do, yeah. So each of the units already comes pre-calibrated. We don't do much yet with recalibrating, I guess, the stock logger when we get it. But when it does come to matching or adjusting the logger, yes, when we set up the logger, we do take out physical measurement and we tell it where it's at. And then periodically, bi-monthly, we've started now going back out and checking what that logger is telling us that the groundwater is, and making sure it's still doing what it's being told to do. So yeah, we keep an eye on that, and I don't think we've seen much drift other than, you know, maybe 2-4 inches, you know, and I think that's pretty good, you know, when you're taking so many measurements.
Yeah, and that will continue in perpetuity, right? Because
Yes.
we recognize that technology is great, but we also have to have the field measurement. So that we'll continue to have that type of a check and balance in place, just to make sure that we're you know, getting good data, because data is good, but we have to make sure we have those checks in place to make sure it's quality data as well. Thank you for your question, and it looks like that maybe is the end of our questions so far. If there's anything else, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I will go ahead and, I don't know what happened to our host. I think they're on mute, but I can go ahead and let's see if I can bring Brett and or Connor back on.
And just to expand a little bit, if you're still there on the calibration, right? These things measure, you know, out 4 decimal places, where the tape I take out there measures by 1/2 foot. So if I'm measuring it at 87.5 and it's telling me it's, you know, 87.3, then it's pretty good. You know, that would be, you know, 2 foot off or whatever. So just keep that in mind, that these are way more sensitive than our physical measurement tape is.
Okay, so we do have a couple of more questions. It sounds like the rest of the audience can hear Brett and Connor, which is great. I'll go ahead and just go through a couple of more questions that came in, which is, do you have plans to collect water quality data moving forward? So we do some water quality data collection for the North Kings GSA. We certainly would do our own water quality samples if there was some claim that there was degraded water quality because of decline in water levels. We haven't had any of those complaints to date, but we have a completely separate network that is specifically for water quality data. So we have about 32 wells. They are all public water system wells, and so we rely on the data that they collect for state regulatory purposes at this point. But if there was some type of an investigation, we would certainly be collecting samples. We may move to more frequent samples in certain areas if needed than even what the public water systems are collecting. So that'll be part of future investigations. And fortunately, we haven't had another extended drought period, and that's typically when we see the claims related to degraded water quality because they're pumping from lower levels. And so since we submitted our plan in 2020 originally, we haven't had a prolonged drought period. And I hope that continues. We had 2023, which was a lifesaver in terms of groundwater management, because we were able to really bring and import a lot of surface water into the area, and that kind of saved us. And so we hope to see more wet years than dry years moving forward, and we'll address water quality as it comes up.
Yeah, if I may, Cassie. When it comes to water quality, you know, from the FID side of things, we could probably kickstart the North Kings GSA, because our groundwater monitoring plans for our basins include water quality. So we do take surface water and groundwater quality from these monitoring wells on a annual basis. And we have been since I've been here, you know. So
yeah, that's a good point. We have a lot of historical water quality, and we use that as our baseline. So yes, thanks, Chris. There's also a question about, do you have published reports which show how you interpret the data and results? From the North Kings perspective, we report out on this every year through what we call the annual report. We have our annual reports are all published on our website, as well as submitted to the state through the Sigma portal at Department of Water Resources. And so happy to share links to any of that if you're interested specifically in a certain report. And then there is a lot of information on FID's website as well.
Yeah, FID does report this data to a consultant that puts together a year-end report for us. So all of this data, groundwater, surface water, quality level, water levels, all of that does get put together for us in a year-end report that explains everything, and those are available to the public as well. So if you'd like a copy of one of those, then just feel free to reach out.
All right, well, that concludes our information today. I really appreciate you all joining us. And like I said, I'll share some information with Connor, and we can get that sent out to those who participated. And if at any time you have questions that we shared our contact information, feel free to reach out. Both Chris and I will make ourselves available, and wish you all the best as you continue to consider and or expand your use of technology to get better data. So thanks again, Brett and Connor, for having us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.